Where do you think you're running, man? We're stuck here together, you shit!
Have you seen Gus Van Sant's My Own Private Idaho? It's an uncompromising, unusual and disturbing film. It's a film about being fucked, both literally and metaphorically. It tells the tragic stories of its main characters, Mike and Scott. The film explores the physical, economic, psychological, and existential struggles these two street hustlers go through. It shows how the stories they tell themselves shape their identities and destinies, and how these stories have their origins in the ideological foundation of capitalist society. This is part 2 of a series of 5 films by Gus Van Sant. Mike suffers from narcolepsy, a condition that causes sudden and uncontrollable episodes of deep sleep. His condition can be seen as a metaphor for his desire to escape from his painful life. His seizures are triggered by stress and the feeling of being cornered. His narcolepsy traps him in a cycle of poverty and helplessness. But it's not only that. Mike lacks the economic, psychological, or intellectual means to escape his situation. This is illustrated by the recurring theme that Mike ends up on the same road again and again.
I always know where I am by the way the road looks. Like I just know that I've been here before. I just know that I've been stuck here.
His seizures and the fact that he has to sell his body just to survive highlight his vulnerability and lack of control over his life. Mike's story is about longing for normality, expressed by his search for his mother and his yearning for belonging. His hopes and dreams are about stability and being loved, which always seem out of reach for him. Scott is shaped by societal norms and pressures, and is unable and unwilling to free himself from the shackles that come with them. Despite pretending to be a rebel, living an alternative lifestyle as a hustler, his life is a charade. All along, Scott has planned to follow in his wealthy father's footsteps. For him, hustling is a temporary phase. His story is about finding out who he is and what he is capable of. It's a story about experimentation and curiosity. Scott is trying to understand life beyond his privileged bubble, while simultaneously having an escape route back to comfort. From an existential point of view, Mike is trapped and knows it. This awareness intensifies his suffering, highlighting his lack of control and continuous hardship. Scott, on the other hand, suffers from living a charade he is unaware of. His ignorance is evident in his inability to see the fundamental difference between his life and Mike's. For example, when Mike and Scott meet Richard, Mike's brother, Scott remains a passive observer despite Richard being hard on Mike, causing Mike significant distress. Scott doesn't interfere or help Mike as a real friend would, which underscores his detachment and inability to empathize fully with Mike's plight. Scott has chosen to be a hustler because he seeks meaning, adventure, and intensity in life. Ironically, his privileged status and upbringing hinder his ability to wholeheartedly empathize with Mike or connect with his intuitive, animalistic self. This detachment from life keeps Scott from truly understanding or sharing Mike's experiences. It seems as if Scott perceives life as a game where individuals play assigned roles. His life consists of playing the roles he believes he has to play in each situation. This belief system prevents him from connecting with Mike on a deeper human level and keeps him trapped in his own inauthentic existence. What makes the characters who they are is summed up in the following scenes.
If I had a normal family and a good upbringing, then I would have been a well-adjusted person.
Mike truly believes that external circumstances determine his fate. Scott, on the other hand, laughs at this idea, saying,
Depends on what you call normal.
Which shows how subjective normalcy can be. On the other hand, Scott's strategic narrative is,
When I turn 21, I don't want any more of this life. My mother and father will be surprised at the incredible change. It will impress them more when such a fuck-up like me turns good.
This shows his temporary commitment to street life and his childish desire for paternal approval. Despite their different existential circumstances and approaches to life, Mike and Scott share the same everyday life as hustlers. Mike out of necessity and Scott by choice. Both believe it's acceptable to sell themselves to suitors, thinking it necessary or even normal to sell their time and their bodies to survive. Neither Scott nor Mike questions the economic laws of their society. Due to their uncritical acceptance, Mike and Scott do not recognize the profound systemic injustices. They are apolitical and do not consider critically questioning the structures and narratives that perpetuate their hardships. What has historically been the role of subcultures and countercultures is completely foreign to Mike and Scott.
I never thought I could make it as a real model. It's alright so long as a photographer doesn't, come on to you and expect something for nothing. I like to have a professional attitude. Of course, if the guy can pay me, then hell yeah, here I am for him.
Scott's economic mantra truly reflects his belief in the laws of the market. From this perspective, My Own Private Idaho is not a film about rebellion, critical thinking, or a serious alternative lifestyle. It is a film about one character who is so psychologically and emotionally damaged that he cannot even think of fighting back, and another who cannot break out of his childish, illusory view that everything is just a game. At the same time, the film suggests that anyone who habitually gives in to systemic injustices and societal, economic, or psychological pressures gradually compromises their integrity, and therefore cannot find true happiness. Mike's desire for normalcy is thwarted by his circumstances, illustrating how a lack of resources and support can trap people in cycles of exploitation. The capitalist logic that Mike unconsciously adopts and believes in does not help him at all. Mike's struggle with poverty and his search for familial connections reflect the marginalization and lack of support in a capitalist society. From a capitalist perspective, Mike is at the bottom of the food chain, and therefore a pawn that can be sacrificed without much hassle. Scott, on the other hand, represents the pinnacle of capitalism. He is a prime example of the trajectory of a child from wealthy parents. Although his temporary rejection of the values his parents believe in highlights the conflict between individual desires and societal expectations, Scott's rebellion, if it ever really was one, is merely a flash in the pan. Worse still, it's a rebellion against the status quo that society desires and even demands. His story shows that wealth and education do not guarantee true autonomy, freedom, happiness, or fulfillment. After finding love with Carmela and experiencing his father's death, Scott returns to his accustomed life. This makes Scott a tragic figure, because he revels in possibilities, but he only realizes those that are compatible with the status quo. From the outside, it appears as if he has control over his life. In reality, he has chosen to play a role written for him for the rest of his life. He is not the author of his own life. He is conservative, well-adjusted, and follows the norm. Find a girl, get married, have children, and grow up with dignity. On a human level, Scott never ended his friendship with Mike, but on a social level he did. Playing his father's game now, Scott has to reject Mike's lifestyle, the same lifestyle he once adhered to. Scott has chosen Carmela and the lifestyle of his father. Scott's hustling face and his friendship with Mike have become his past. Scott got what he wanted from his rebellious phase, experience, a taste of true friendship and true love with Carmela. Now, he moves on. Mike's endurance in the face of harsh reality, even after feeling abandoned by Scott, shows his lack of options. He lives the only life he knows, demonstrating resilience, but also tragic acceptance. The film's Climax at the Cemetery, when Mike and the other hustlers bury Bob, a charismatic figure and leader, in a chaotic and anarchistic manner, contrasts sharply with the formal establishment funeral for Scott's father. This scene highlights their different worlds and deep-seated envy and misunderstanding. Scott envies what he sees as Mike's freedom and carelessness, while Mike envies Scott's access to a normal life and financial stability. Both characters are trapped by their respective circumstances and unable to achieve true happiness. My Own Private Idaho shows the tragic consequences of our narratives. It pushes viewers to question the stories they tell themselves and societal pressures shaping their lives. Through Mike and Scott, the film illustrates that being fucked goes beyond physical exploitation, touching on economic, psychological, and existential dimensions. The film's ultimate message is a harsh criticism of capitalism and its rules and narratives. It calls for a critical examination of our personal narratives and a search for deeper fulfillment and happiness. If you feel fucked, ask yourself, am I living by the rules and narratives of a capitalist society? Have I given in to systemic injustices and societal, economic, or psychological pressures? Or am I truly autonomous and living with integrity, following my own rules and convictions?